All right, so last week, you guys got the three perverse stories, right? Telltale Heart, Black Cat, Into the Perverse. Over the past week, you've gotten a lot more taste of Poe, right? I had you read his two most famous poems. I'll be interested to hear what you guys think about Poe the poet. Um, yeah, when it comes to poetry, Poe doesn't get as much respect as he maybe deserves, in my opinion. And also these three stories for today: Ligeia, Fall of the House of Usher, and William Wilson. So those stories thematically really don't have much in common with each other, right? Those are really three different stories that give you a big, gives you extra flavors of Poe, right? One of the things I like about House of Usher, especially, is setting. Right, setting something I'll be interested to hear you guys talk about with that one. But maybe let's divide and conquer here a little bit. Let's maybe start with the poems. Um, what was your guys' take on these poems? Did you find Annabel Lee and the Raven? What did you guys? What's your guys' hot takes?
Annabel Lee was my favorite of the both. Right. I think more because it had more of like a love feel as opposed to having more of like the grief and darker side of grief with the Raven.
To tell you the truth, on the discussion board there, I had written probably 300 or 400 words, and had to take a break from it, and I saved my draft, and I tried to go back to it, and I couldn't get my draft to pull up. Whenever I submitted my discussion, I wasn't too happy with the Blackboard program, but with the Raven and Annabel Lee, it's typical Poe, and they loved with a love that was more than love. I am my Annabel Lee. It's literally the most poetic love rhythmic line ever written. It makes me happy to be married. It makes me happy to be a human. And then he goes and kills it. He couldn't leave well enough to be. And then with the Raven, he's a troubled guy. He's just had a big loss of his own. He's buried himself in books trying to step away from it. And all of a sudden hears this stranger knock at the door. He's roused from sleep, and it's sitting up there, and you can almost guarantee to draw 15 different conclusions about whether the Raven's real or not. It is symbolic of his sanity. Is it an actual raven? Is it the Raven's Mungan, and I forget what the other one is from Norse mythology. Is it an African omen? There's just so much that it could be. It's written in a way that it just leaves it open for interpretation that you can sit here and talk all day about.
Right, the Raven sitting on a statue of Athena too, which is interesting. I'm not even going to pretend to know what the significance of that is, right? But
well,
Ravens.
I fell down the rabbit hole for about 3 hours the other day on just the statue alone. And it's not even Athena. I mean, in some ways it is Athena, but in other ways it's a Titan that predates Athena. That's what I'm saying. It's just so much interpretation. It all depends on how you want to take it and how your research individually goes. I even got on YouTube and listened to a bunch of, analysis of the poem, because it's so long. You read it 3 or 4 times, you still don't know what's going on. So I listen to other people try to explain what's going on, and they have no idea what's going on. It's literally in the eyes of the beholder.
I think my take on it, and I think I wrote about it on Monday's discussion, was that the statue was Athena, who represents wisdom, and so the raven represented his grief. So his grief was basically making him crazy. That's what my take on it was.
That's what I got from it too. That he used the raven and Athena as symbolizing his grief into his insanity, because he understood the grief, but then the raven, he just took it as part of his insanity.
Well, go ahead, Jacob.
Well, I'd also heard it mentioned that the raven was a figment of his imagination for him to talk himself off the ledge, for him to recall what was good about his life and what's troubling him now, and to kind of come to heart with what's going on in his life. It wasn't that it was driving him insane, but that it was bringing him closer back to his sanity. It was one of those. Again, you can go either way with it.
Yeah, if we want to keep going down the mythology route, I know when Zeus punishes Hephaestus, or when not Hephaestus, when Zeus punishes Prometheus for giving fire
because
to
he gave
mankind.
man fire.
Right. He also uses ravens. The ravens are constantly like picking out Prometheus's insides for all of eternity as a punishment.
Well,
That's
in African mythology, it says that ravens are viewed as gods. And then in Japanese mythology, it was saying that they were wisdom. And then with the Greek, it was connected to Athena, which was, goddess of wisdom. And then in Norse, it was Mungan, and I keep forgetting the other one, but that was, the eye of, what's his name, Odin, which is knowledge. So there's 5 different conclusions right there, just going off of what type of mythology Poe just so happened to be reading that night.
right. Which who knows with him, right? He was such a prolific reader, right? This was a time period in American history in which ideas from the Eastern world, right, were finally creeping in over into America. Like this is the first time that Americans were reading stuff like Hindu scriptures.
I'll tell you something else interesting. My grandpa actually brought it up. I'm here in St. Albans, and it's supposedly the house where he had written or had gotten inspired to write The Raven is here in St. Albans, West Virginia.
Really? I haven't heard that.
Yeah, apparently he was in town for a family member's burial and had stayed at a house here in St. Albans. And I forget the story exactly, but it's connected to the Raven. I Googled it, and yeah, sure enough, it's here.
That's awesome. I did not know that.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Of course, then it would have just been Virginia, right? So Poe lived in Virginia, mostly near Richmond, but it's I'm sure it's very feasible he could have got over to this side pretty easily for a funeral.
Well, I think that they have railroad receipts for a ticket for him, and of course, he was here at the house. But that, like I said, they don't know if he actually read it here or if it just was his inspiration here. But yeah, you could Google that. That's something cool here in West Virginia. Apparently, they do a big Halloween thing every year.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I did not know about that. Why do you guys think this poem is so popular? Think about how much this poem's inspired our popular culture. We even have like an NFL team named after this poem, right? Baltimore Ravens, right? Baltimore. There's 3 cities that try to take credit for Poe, right? Richmond does. The Poe Museum is actually in Richmond. Baltimore tries to take credit for being Poe's place. I think Philadelphia is the other city, right? But Philadelphia's got enough writers, right? They don't need Poe. Right. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, why is this poem so iconic, do you think?
I think it's because you can use it for different symbolisms. Like a person could take it and could be going through two different things, but they could be symbolic to both. And I think a lot of his writing is like that.
So you think just the complexity of the thing that way that we can make 10 different meanings of it, right? That you think
Right.
that's why?
Yeah. Could mean something different to each person that reads it.
I don't know. I think it was just because it was so different. You know, at the time, everything was so proper. And everybody was trying to be the highest of society. And Poe was over here just doing his own thing. You know, he put out something the world had never heard before. Yeah, maybe they had ghost stories, but they were light. You know, they were children's stories compared to Poe. And not only did he put down horror on the page, but he did it with, you know, language that was proper. And he used words that sent people to their dictionary, and he made people feel like scholars while reading something interesting. I think it was just because he was changing the game.
Right. So even the accessibility of it, right? You know, Poe's a
Yeah, he was
even-
printing
even-
in newspapers. He wasn't selling whole books.
the story by story in these different papers, right? That's how he made his living. He did do one novel. It's called The Narrative of let's see, what is it? The Narrative of Arthur Pym, I think's the name. Yeah, Arthur Gordon Pym. I've actually never read that. But that's the only novel that he ever did.
Yeah, I've never even heard of it.
Yeah, I've got my complete works over here, and yeah, it's on the list. I want to get around to it. It's about going to Antarctica. I know, like this was a time period of vast exploration of the poles, especially. So, and I'm pretty sure like there's some horror stuff that goes on in that, right? So. What did you guys think of the constant repetitions in the poem, right? Especially the or sound, right? More, evermore, Lenore, right?
Yeah, I'm not even going to pretend to understand rhyme schemes. I know it was like A B C B B B or something. I don't have a musical bone in my body.
There's really not a.
It sounds nice.
Yeah, there's really not a term for what Poe does here, right? It's so outside of the mainstream norm. This was a time period too where American poets were just like, you know what? We're not Brits, right? We don't have to follow the Brits rules anymore about writing sonnets and stuff like this. So we're just going to do our own thing. Poe definitely did his own thing here. So there's really no way to describe what he does.
What I put in my discussion post for that week was I believe he done the more and evermore and Lenore was to mainly keep our attention. He wanted us to focus merely on him, on his stories, and by using the same alliterations at the end of each section was just to keep us there, to keep us on him.
Right. So especially if the poem's read aloud or something, right? That constant repetition sound kind of keeps your mind on track. Yeah, I think you're right about that, Irene. That's definitely something. That's definitely a purpose for why he keeps repeating that sound over and over. Yeah, he does. Door, more, floor, Lenore, before, implore, right? It's amazing how many words he comes up with that has that sound at the end of it. It's not like he even uses more and nevermore all the time, right? It's even amazing how many words he came up with that sound.
Yeah, and with the Raven, especially, it's not pre-rehearsed. It's just as it was coming into his mind. Like there's no evidence that he actually had to sit down and think of, oh, okay, that sounds good, let's put that in there. It literally, the way it flows is as it's hitting his mind. So he actually knew all those words and was like, it just clicked, and he just put it straight on the paper or the parchment. I think they used parchments back then.
No, they had paper by this point. Yeah. Yeah,
I don't know. Personally, I think it was just one of those things that made Poe's writing even better and even mysterious. Like it made Poe's writings unique.
right. Yeah, just the fact that he does repeat that same rhyme over and over and over, right? Something that no Brit poet or Italian poet, right, had ever done before. Usually when it comes to poems, like for instance, a British sonnet is 14 lines. And they're usually rhymed. Every other line is rhymed. So the first line and the third line are rhymed. The second line and the fourth line are rhymed. Right, so forth and so on. So he's actually doing something a little more complicated here, right, than even what they were doing.
And also in Annabel Lee, he done the same thing with the Castle by the Sea, the Kingdom by the Sea. Because in the other lines that he wrote, there was no mentioning of, being near a kingdom or being near the sea until right at the end to grab you right back in. It's kind of like I don't know, a way to stun you so you could stay, like a suspicion type thing, is the way I took it.
Right. Something else besides the repetition to make note of is he uses a lot of alliteration too. Alliterations when you use the same consonant sound, opening consonant sound to a word over and over in the line. So I'm just looking at a line here. Where did I see it? Perched upon a bust of Pallas just above the chamber door, perched and sat and nothing more, right? Listen all the time. You hear that P sound in that line, right? Perched, Pallas, perched again. Ghostly grin, right? Repetition of the G sounds. So he does a lot of that here too to keep that rhythm going. Right, he uses a lot of alliteration. That was an old school type of way of writing poems. Right? They did it that way so that they could remember it, to do like a public performance of it. So he does a lot of that kind of thing too, which is pretty cool. Did any of you guys listen to that really dramatic reading of it that I posted on Blackboard? That is really dramatic, read by the great Christopher Lee. Yeah.
No, I have the complete works there in Audible. I was just listening to it on that.
Well, I implore you all to check it out. Right, it's Yeah, it's really cool and dramatic, right? Christopher Lee's got that voice that I think really works for the poem. Christopher, if you guys are Lord of the Rings fans in here, right? Christopher Lee was who played the evil wizard Sauron, right? He was in Star Wars too. He was Count Dooku.
I didn't know he was in Star Wars.
Yeah, he was in the prequels. He's also probably the most famous Dracula to ever play probably the second most. Bela Lugosi's the most famous.
I listened to the Fall of the House of Usher, the animation, and he's the one that it was really good.
He's got a heck of a voice, doesn't he?
Hmm.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool animation, I thought. Like that originally showed up on some Netflix show, I think.
I love watching the animations. I listen to it, and then I always go and search for the animations. I get so disappointed when they don't have them.
Yeah, that's the only one of the stories we read, I think, that has one. Yeah, and as far as Annabel Lee goes, I guess some of you guys were saying that you liked that one even more. You notice about this one, the lines are a lot shorter in it. It's definitely, I mean, sure, there's not as many lines as the Raven, but the lines are a lot shorter. Part of his magic here, I know, is he uses what's called anapests, right? That's whenever you have a beat, that's like the thumb beat, right? So imagine if you were on the drums, right? 2 light taps and then a hard tap, right? The thumb, right? So in a kingdom by the sea, right? And this maiden, she lived with no other thought, right? So it's kind of got that the thumb beat to it, right? Which is a unique sound. Usually, when it comes to English poetry, it all usually has a the thumb, like light beat, strong beat, the thumb. He put 2 light beats before the heavy beat, right? The thumb, right? So thinking about rhythm, right? If the way that you measure that's actually ask yourself what syllable when the word's stressed, right? So whenever you have especially a multi-syllable word, which syllable do you put the most stress on? Right? He followed that kind of pattern, the thumb with his rhythm. So it's got a unique rhythm to it too, right? It's the effect of it, Annabel Lee especially, is it has a kind of a sing-songy type quality, right? You know, as I showed you guys, the Stevie Nicks did a song of it, right? It's got the lyrics are it's very lyrical, right? Where you could almost sing it because of the rhythm and the beat. Of course, he rhymes a lot in here too, which also helps. Other thoughts on the poems before we leave it and go to the short stories? All right, well, good. I'm looking forward to reading through your responses, through the responses on it from you guys and everybody else.
No,
So,
mine wasn't very good. I was too mad at it.
right. Well, even if it wasn't that good, Jacob, you'll have one drop. So at the end of the year, if that's the worst one you did, it'll be dropped. So now let's talk the stories. So which story you guys want to talk about first? We can go in any order here. which story most intrigued you all of the three?
I like Ligeia. I guess I'm saying that right.
Mm-hmm. You are?
You know, I really, but before I got into science and being a nerd, I really enjoyed mythology and history and even religious studies. You know, raised Baptist and never really agreed or sat right with me, so I got to looking at other things, and uh, this this the story really had that kind of tone. You know, it's about immortality. You know, it's about that religious shadow that just kind of floats right there in the middle between God and man and will. Um, to me, that's what I got from it. Story of self-made immortality through the power of will and God.
Right. Yeah, there's a passage in there, right, which especially talks about the will. Ligeia has kind of an indomitable will, right? That even after her death, right, her will to live, right, still permeates in the air.
Now, I didn't have as much time with these as I did with the ones on Monday. I didn't make it William Wilson. I did read through Ligeia and the House of Usher, and I got to watch the analysis on the House of Usher, but not on Ligeia. But you know, the House of Usher, to me, it was a lot of setting stuff. You know, it's not really my cup of tea. Couldn't flow with it. But the Ligeia, it's right down my alley. Um, it repeated a few verses, and it made you think that she was trying to speak from beyond the grave and tell you, hey, this is what you really need to focus on. And she's reaching up through her husband and through her past life, and it kind of makes you think that she killed what, I forget her name, but his new wife, and that she embodied her body after she had died. You know, to me, it's really about immortality and moving on to the next life.
Yeah, what did you guys think of that, especially that plot point, right? Do you guys think that so again, we have an unreliable narrator here, right? There's only so much we can trust about what this guy says. He talks
Yeah,
about
he was
how
high off his rocker.
Yeah, he talks about how he takes opium, right? And back in the day, they didn't get it through pharmaceuticals, right? They just straight up smoked it or ate it even, right? You guys think a weed brownie is tough today, right? That's nothing compared to actually eating pure opium as they did.
Yeah, that was a hallucinogen, wasn't it?
Yep.
There's just something about Poe and his unreliable narrators. Like, you just never know 100% what's going on, because you can't take everything that they say for word or for how it's actually happening.
Right. Yeah. He thinks he hears this dead body gasping, right? And maybe it's just him tripping balls here, right? As far as that goes. Yeah, but we have this unreliable narrator, right? You got so let's break this narrator down a little bit. What did you guys especially think about this narrator, right? Especially his love for Ligeia, right? It's pretty intense, right? It's
Well,
you know,
I don't know. What I got from it was, at first, you know, yeah, he was married to her, but he wasn't as in love with her as she was with him. You know, she idolized him. And what he ended up falling in love with was that sense of idolism. You know, I don't think that he truly loved her until she was already gone.
right. So after her death, there's no longer that person to idolize him, right? So maybe she appealed to his vanity.
I thought it was
Yeah.
strange that he didn't remember anything about her, like her last name or like how he met her or anything like that. All he spoke about her was really just her look and like how she acted.
That is odd. That is odd, right? He couldn't even remember her maiden name, right? Which is kind of strange.
I got to page 7, and so far all I'm saying is that when he's trying to remember about her, he's really set in her eyes, which is also a window to her soul. But he wishes that like he paid more attention to her, and he's just really focused on the love that she had in her eyes that he never seen before, and thought that she was dead.
Yeah, she's got these giant eyes he keeps talking about, right? You know, they're so big. So Irene just said the window to the soul reading of that, right? Maybe she has a soul, like a really big soul, I guess you could say. Did any of you guys find this love that he had kind of weird, right? I mean, this goes beyond just normal love and affection, right? This is pretty intense. Did any of you guys even find the narrator kind of creepy, right? With how much he idolized Ligeia, right?
Yeah, and the whole scene with his new wife and that room that he decorates, that whole thing was weird too. Like, just weird.
Yeah, the setting in the church, that's when it really started getting creepy. And whenever the hand came out as an apparition to poison her cup, that one got me a little bit.
Right, all the ladies in the room, you want to be admired just like how the narrator admires Ligeia here, right? That aspirations to reach for here, right? your stalker man, right? That's the narrator in Ligeia. What did you guys make about her big eyes that he keeps talking about? Her pearly white teeth. Why does this character have such big eyes? Do you think? Irene, go ahead.
I've noticed with Poe, he's fascinated with eyes. He uses eyes like in the Black Cat, and he talks about the fire in the cat's eyes. And then in the Raven, he talks about the demons. I can't remember to quote it, but he talks about the eyes. And then in Ligeia, he talks about the big eyes and being a window to the soul. Like, I feel like he's trying to symbolize, I don't know, maybe souls within the, because when you do look at somebody and you look in their eyes, there's a lot of times you can look in somebody's eyes and you can kind of tell what mood they're in, whether or not, you either get like a creepy feeling when you're around them. I've looked at somebody, some people's and really have got a creepy feeling. But I feel like he does emphasize a lot on eyes in his stories.
Well, if you think back to when we read The Telltale Heart, it also goes right back to me and I can't remember his name, our classmate, when we were talking about schizophrenia and stuff. There is a type of paranoia of where you either obsess over odds or you're terrified of it. You're terrified of being watched. And I think that's what he's still pursuing in all the stories so far, especially in Ligeia, because he is focused on her eyes. And that does go with what you're saying, Tiffany, about the soul and everything, but it could also be another way to look at it that way is a psychosis. Because you can't get away from it. And it's going to follow in the way the narrator puts it in this. It kind of goes along with the Telltale Heart, Black Cat, everything we've read too.
Yeah, that reminds me of I had a neighbor once who was very, very religious, but he had a statue of Jesus, and like that it would track your movements, and like the eyes would like follow you like as you walk around the room, right? I don't know what your comment just reminded me of that, how creepy that was. Right? But yeah, I mean, everything you said there is spot on, right?
I think with this story, my perspective of it was, she was awake. Uh, her eyes. He explains that, she's well educated. He never found her at fault. He was never able to say she was wrong. She was just genuinely intelligent, and she seemed aware of things that other people weren't. Uh, and I think that's why her eyes are depicted as big and, you know, uh, well, piercing, flat, is because she's just available to the information that's, she's attuned to it.
Right. She has a very deep soul here, it seems like, right? She understands all these different languages and all these different subjects. That this is interesting because in one of my other classes, I was actually teaching some Greek philosophy stuff, and one of Plato's dialogues, he talks about the existence of the soul, right? Does the soul exist? This relates to Ligeia because Plato argued that the soul does exist, but even as a soul, like this is where it differs from Christianity. Plato argued even as a soul, the soul existed before you were even born, right? So, and then that same soul is constantly recycled kind of through. It's almost like a reincarnation idea. Plato and Socrates both argued that even learning things is an act of recollection. So, like when you learn something, that's your soul remembering something that it had forgotten about from its previous life. So, that for some reason or other, the story reminded me of that. Right, just because, like, where did Ligeia's soul go? Right, did her soul go back? Did her soul actually go into the corpse of Lady Rowena here? Right, it's an interesting thought.
One of the renditions I've heard of the soul, and this, you talking made me think of it. I've heard it described as, the souls of men lie in a vast empty cavern, and each of them are a flame, some burning brighter than others. And in the story there, I believe it mentions the flame burning bright around Ligeia. And that really threw me back to it. And then even more so once you got into about the soul. I think that's the emerald tablets of Thoth that describe it that way. Thoth was an Egyptian god of knowledge.
Right. Yeah. Some souls do burn brighter than others. Right. Maybe that's part of like why her eyes and stuff are so big. Right. Just the fact that her soul is so vast and deep, understanding of things. An old soul, we could say, for Ligeia, right? Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Like even when we learn things, is that us remembering something? Is that our soul remembering something from a previous life? Again, it depends if you subscribe what type of religion or whatever you subscribe to there, right? Christianity, the soul is born when you're born, right? and then it goes somewhere afterward, but there's a certain starting point, right? Not in Greek philosophy. It's not how it works. So let's take a poll here, right? Jacob said that he thought that that was the lady, his second wife, right? That was her clinging on to life, and he imagined that was Ligeia. Right, what do the rest of you guys think? You guys think that actually was Ligeia's soul going back into this body? Right? You guys think?
It would make sense in a way, because he clearly, like, when they're talking about souls, like you said, talking about Christianity, when everybody believes different things. But if that was her soul, and a lot of times people say souls have to move on, if he wasn't letting her move on, so he's so depressed, he's so miserable, he can't get her out of his head, he's clinging to the thought of her still being alive, then maybe, she couldn't move on.
Yeah, that's a cool thought, Taylor. Yeah, I haven't thought about how he was maybe keeping her trapped, right? Because he couldn't let go of her. See, so maybe her taking over this body in that case would be her trying to help him get over his grief, or something like that. What about the rest of you? Tiffany, what's your thoughts here? You think?
I echo Taylor. I like that. That makes more sense the way she said it. I agree.
Haley, what about you? What do you think?
Personally, I never thought of it the way that Taylor did, but now that she brought it up, I actually see it better now. I agree with her.
Yeah, that was really insightful comment, Taylor. Yeah, maybe again though, was that his own opium-filled mind, right? That was perceiving these things. Right? It's an interesting.
That's what would make the most sense, is that he was just high and none of it actually ever happened.
That would be a pretty big hallucination, right? Not only that she's gasping for air after she's dead, right, but she actually gets up and walks over to him and stuff, right? That's pretty freaky. That would be one heck of a hallucination. Kristen, Taylor, you guys have any thoughts on this?
I pretty much agree with her also. I don't know. I just feel that Poe is just crazy. That's all I can think when I read his poems. I never know really what to believe, 100 different things will go through my mind. So
yeah, was it you last week, Jacob, who said that it was sometimes hard to distinguish between Poe, the person, and these characters? Was that you who said that last week?
Me and Colton were firing back and forth last week, but we were both on the same page there.
Right. It took a fantastical mind to even think of this stuff, right? It is a creepy and unsettling story, right? It's one of the reasons why I always assign this one. He does play around too in this story with setting. This is a good way to segue over to House of Usher too. He does play with setting a little bit. This is
the tapestry,
right? The tapestries. He's in this old English manor, far out in the woods, right? Where he's
it was an old church. It was an abbey. It was where nuns. I'm sorry, I got a fire truck run by. Basically it was a house for nuns. They sat and worshipped and everything, and then hundreds of years later he buys it because it's removed from society, and he decorates it as a house and fills it with these gold tapestries that makes his opium hallucinations twice as bad. And opium's a drug. It's not crack, it's not meth or anything like that. It doesn't last 15 minutes. It lasts several days. So he may have very well just been very high for months on end and imagined all this. It's completely in the air.
Right. Yeah, he's right. It is this old abbey. Right. This is where we start to get some Gothic architecture coming into these stories a little bit. Right. Gothic's not only a mood, but it's also this form of architecture, especially that was popular in Europe, especially in the Middle Ages. Right. The term Gothic actually comes from the old Germanic tribes, right, that were part of the ancient world. So, like the Visigoths, for instance. Now, these were the enemies of Rome, right? These were the enemies of civilization. So, and most of where they lived was in Western Europe, so like France and England and stuff like that. So, the term for a lot of those sort of weird, like especially religious and Catholic buildings, right? That's how that term Gothic originated.
And that's one of the things that actually it strikes me now, but it didn't strike me a whole lot while I was reading the poem or the story. And it says that Ligeia was really well off, and he inherited well after her death. He was loaded. He went and bought this on a whim, and he's taking opium every day. He's a well-off man, and he marries this woman just to have a companion. But she has distaste for him, and he doesn't really care for her either, because he's longing for that idolism that Ligeia was showing him, and he can't find it, and he's just high. With that much wealth and having a new wife that's younger than him and on opium and having everything he wants, you would think he'd be happy, but he's just removed. He's drawn back from society. He's removed himself from the equation.
Yeah, she's a lady too, right? She has that aristocracy sort of old wealth in England, right? England is a country that's much more divided on class lines than Americans are, right? You have the aristocracy, you got the poor, right? The aristocracy comes from these long lines of old families that go back centuries. So she's a lady, right? So
that might be a good place to jump in on the House of Usher, a good tying point.
Right, she's a lady, right? So it's no wonder that she didn't idolize him the way that he did, the way that Ligeia did. The fact that he doesn't remember Ligeia's last name, right, might come into that too, right? Maybe Ligeia didn't come from that sort of old wealth. But if so, how did she get her wealth, right? That's an interesting question too. It kind of goes beyond the scope of the story. We don't know. But it would make sense there, Jacob, right? That's why she didn't idolize him, right? Because it's not like she's some poor person, right? Marrying a rich.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I didn't even think about it like that. Yeah, his second wife came from nobility, and he's got no name, but he has money. So she married for money, and he's improper in society, and she grows to hate him because of it. I can definitely see that.
She's probably kind of forcibly married to him, right? It wasn't a marriage of love, right? This was definitely an arranged marriage for class purposes. Whereas Ligeia is maybe more of a wedding of love, right, rather than financial. That's how it worked back in the day, guys. That was the marriage economy, right? Daughters were seen as, of course, when you pass property and stuff now, only men could inherit that. So daughters are kind of seen as extra baggage to fathers and stuff. So like oftentimes the father would arrange a marriage with somebody, right? And in turn, the husband got some type of money or wealth out of the deal, right? Called a dowry. Right. So that's how marriages used to work for the most part, and especially in England. So, and this definitely wasn't a marriage of love. This was a marriage probably of money. He stood something to gain by going through with that second marriage. Any of you guys ever read any Jane Austen stuff in here? Jane, like stuff like Pride and Prejudice. Yeah, Taylor, you're saying you read some Jane.
I've read Pride and Prejudice. I love that. That was such a good book.
Yeah. Now that book's all about this stuff, right? The marriage economy, right? Trying to marry a father, trying to marry off the daughters, right? To hopefully give them some better opportunities. And it's a little depressing to think about, right? Think about how many hundreds of years like women were mostly just married off to maybe people they didn't even care about, right? Just to get a better life, right? Financial marriages.
Sorry, I'm here by myself with the kids tonight.
Oh, you're good, Jacob.
Me too. That's why I have my video off.
You guys are good. So now, like Jacob said, this is a good way to transfer over to Follow the House of Usher. So where to begin with this one, right? This guy goes to visit his pal, right? Roderick Usher at his big giant mansion. Right. This is a family that does go back centuries. And you can trace the family line way back. And, well, he goes there to find this house is in extreme decay. Right, the house is kind of falling apart. Of course, this was a time period, historically speaking, where this form of old money started kind of dying out a little bit. Right, the aristocracy stopped. Let me rephrase. The aristocracy lost its importance a little bit because, well, with the Industrial Revolution and capitalism and stuff like that, right, these factory owners and stuff started becoming just as rich as these old families used to be. So you had this conflict between the new rich and the old rich in the 19th century. So the fact that we had come to this old aristocracy house, right? Everything's falling apart. Part of that perhaps is due to this, right? The aristocracy was losing its importance and its flair at this time. In America, there really wasn't much of an aristocracy, right? Poe's setting this story definitely in Europe. Whereas in a lot of his stories, like Telltale Heart, you can kind of imagine them being set anywhere. This is definitely a story that's set in Europe, and because Americans have never went to this kind of thing, right? This is one of our big rejections of old British culture.
And you get the feeling that the house has stood for all of eternity. Well, in America at the time, we were barely, 50, 100 years old. America was founded in 1776. So yeah, about in 1850, that would put us right at 75 years old, where and thereabout. So there really wasn't any houses in America that had stood or could be that iconic. You pull up to it and it's this prolific structure, and yes, it's crumbling, but it still holds so much pride for your country. We didn't have that.
Right, not at that time. By the time we got to like the 1900s, especially in the South, right, this old, like in the South, this aristocracy idea started coming up, right? You started having these old families from the old South and their big mansion, their big plantation mansion, right? Probably when this family had slaves, right? So a form of aristocracy did emerge mostly in the South, but well after the story, right? That's something that took place in the early 1900s. You started seeing these old rich families, especially in the South. Yeah, do you guys see a lot of that? I mean, West Virginia is kind of a weird state. We're kind of half north and half south as far as culturally, right? Have you guys seen this type of thing, right? Any old families that go way, way, way back?
Carnegie, you know, and of course a bunch of the coal guys. Massey.
Right. There's even the Thomas Jefferson's family line still goes today. Two different family lines, from his rightful family line to his family line that he had with slaves, right? Thomas Jefferson was a little mischievous in that way. Yes, but maybe we don't see that kind of thing much around here. This is definitely kind of a Mississippi and Alabama type of thing, right? These old families that go way, way, way back, have these big houses.
Now, I had my aunt, she used to live in a huge plantation house in Alabama. And that was one of those houses, like you walk in and you get chill bumps.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so neat.
Why did you get chill bumps, do you think?
From all the history that happened and like all the bad stuff. Because she had told us that there's like 3 or 4 people that they know of that had died in that house. And that they say that there was probably even more. So like you could just feel it right whenever you enter. Because my aunt, she was sleeping. She said, I swear I woke up and seen a man in a wheelchair staring at me.
Well, I mean, with a house that stood for hundreds of years, you know, before today's modern age, our life expectancy is topped out at what, 69 years? And it's only topped 70 years since 1970 something. You know, we've come that long, that far in the last 3 decades. But before this, you know, you were having a new generation. You know, people were getting married at 14, 15 years old. You were having a new generation that often. And as many people that would come in, as many people would go out. You know, the amount of death that would pile up over the years in that kind of situation, in that kind of setting. Couldn't even begin to count it without proper paperwork from the county.
So much of this was about preserving these bloodlines too, right? You know, you guys know even with Henry VIII, right? He wanted to have a son to continue the bloodline. So much of this old wealth stuff was about continuing that bloodline. This is kind of where we get to some of the creepy stuff in the story, right? So I'll just ask you guys this. Did you guys get, or what do you guys make of the relationship between Roderick and his sister? Of course, his sister is the one who dies, right? Is there something a little off about this relationship, do you think?
I think that the whole story was so creepy. Because with the whole, like with the Telltale Heart and the Black Cat, the narrators are clearly got some, like, they're crazy. But this is clearly like supernatural. Like the narrator's more reliable in what he says and does. Obviously, he's not off his rocker. So the whole thing is just really, really creepy to me.
I don't know if you guys are into watching horror flicks or anything, but it really put me in mind of the House of Crimson or Crimson Peak. Yeah, Crimson.
Mm. Yeah, great movie. Tom Hiddleston, right? The guy who plays Loki is in it. Yeah, you're exactly. I think that movie was loosely based on the story, right? Just because it's so similar.
Yeah, and this was definitely my first time reading The House of Usher. You know, but I'm a big horror flick fan, and I've watched Crimson Peak 1,000 times, and I was sitting there to myself reading this. It's like, yeah, it's about that there.
Yeah, that movie is pretty much the story, right? You're exactly right. Del Toro's who directed that one, right? Give away with Del Toro. But Taylor says she's creeped out, right? Something supernatural is going on. You can actually trust the narrator here, which adds in this story, maybe adds to the tension even more, right? Just because before we could shake it off. Maybe it's an open dream. Can't quite do that here, right? This narrator hasn't quite lost his marbles yet. What did you guys, again, I go back to the question, what did you guys think of this relationship between Roderick? Sister's name's Madeline, isn't it? Roderick and Madeline, I think. What's up? I might be wrong on that name. Their relationship seems a little weird here, right?
I watched the animated video that you put up online, and the storyline of it was kind of creepy. Like they were more than just brother and sister, I think, and it was weird, his affection for her. Like she couldn't live without him, and he couldn't live without her. And then when she died, it kind of drove him mad too.
Right. Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Irene. There's something more here than just sibling love, right? There's something a little. It's not spelled out, but something is a little strange and amiss here, right?
Yeah, I don't want to go all the way as saying they had a romantic love for one another or an affair love for one another, but it kind of spells it out almost. But it was like they depended on, well, he depended on her more than she depended on him. Like she didn't feel the same way he did. But the fact that he says what he does, it just, I don't know. It was beyond creepy.
Like I had this random thought, I could be wrong, but she had this mysterious sickness, and like he said that he wanted to like bury her in the tomb under the house because he didn't want like scientists to dig her up later, like to try to figure out what was wrong with her because the disease was so strange. And I'm just like, was he like poisoning her? Like he could have like, I don't know. I feel like he had something to hide.
And the fact that even when they think that they buried her prematurely, right? This was a big fear that they had in the 1800s, right? What if they put somebody in a coma who was in a coma and buried them, and then you woke up from your coma and you were in a coffin, right? This was something that happens sometimes, right? Imagine being buried alive. Right.
Yeah, they used to have the bells with the string, and that way, if you were buried alive, you pull the string and it'd ring the bell.
It's like back in biblical times where they had the death watch for 4 days. Because this was a big thing, and then after that, you didn't hear of it anymore, like in the 1900s. And so when they do get a sickness or something, because they didn't have the tools to actually find out if they were dead or not, they just buried them. And I think because he did have that love for her, that they did bury her prematurely or put her in the tomb.
Now listened to an analysis on YouTube that was pretty far stretched. And I don't know if I want to break it out just yet. But, it's probably the craziest one I listened to, and I listened to about 4 of them. This guy had a theory that the main character, not the narrator, but the brother, he was like closet homo. I know that's the wrong way to say that. I was trying to look for a better way to phrase it. His sister, represented his feminine side, and they were both sick. It said that he had an illness of the mind for many years, and she had this strange illness. And what it was just the crippling depression from hiding this from his friends and from his aristocratic family. He's hid this all of his life. He's in the later part of his years, and it's just driven him to madness and the depression, and his body's breaking down as a result of it.
That's interesting, Jacob. I've never thought of Roderick as being maybe like a gay character before. I never thought of that. But perhaps, I mean, I could see the merit in that analysis, right? Perhaps that's why the house is crumbling, so to speak, right? Because he won't continue that bloodline.
Yeah, and I'm going to get on YouTube again and look at my history, see if I can't get the URL for that, see if I can't post a link for it. But it was really interesting, and he went off on a whole tangent. I don't remember everything he said, but that was the basis.
Right. Often when it comes to this kind of thing, oftentimes the way these old writers would signify stuff like different types of sexualities was they would make they call this queer studies, right? The authors, of course, I told you guys before in the video, they use that term, which is a negative term. And scholars of this type of stuff try to make that a positive thing, right? They try to take a nasty word and make it positive. But they call this queering items, especially in like Gothic fiction, right? So the fact that something seems queer in the air, right, in the house, right? The books are all amiss. Right? There's some type of crack in the foundation of the house, right? These types of weird, they call it queer, but a synonym could be peculiar or odd or something like that, right? The fact that there's all this stuff that's strange, they oftentimes use that to kind of code a sexual message in it, right? So, am I making sense here?
Yeah, I'm completely following you. And it honestly, I'm one of those guys that 10 years ago I never would have thought about it. But now it's so prevalent that you have to think about it. And after listening to the guy's opinion, I can't deny it. It makes some kind of sense. Yes, I'm more in favor of, it was his sister and he was having a romantic affair with her and, blah, blah, blah. But this was just so far high and right of what everybody else is saying that I thought it was worth a mention.
Yeah, this type of thing was expressed through metaphors and symbols, right? That's kind of where I was going with this analysis, with this point, building off what Jacob said.
If their relationship was romantic, that would also work for the house falling apart, because then he's not going to marry anybody else because he's in love with his sister. And that would make sense also for the house symbolism.
Yeah, that's always how I've read the story, Taylor. I'll be honest. That's always how I've read the story. That's my own opinion, right? But I've always seen it as they had something a little weird going on, right? The fact that at the very end of the story, the house dramatically kind of sinks into the ground, right? Crumbles apart finally, right? After the last of the bloodline is gone, right? This was how a lot of these old families preserved their lines, right? There was a lot, especially in England and stuff, like the hat to continue this nobility, right? They would often resort to incest, right, to preserve this old rich bloodline, right? Was yeah, I mean, you guys know why, right? So, you know, they had preserving the bloodline is the most important thing.
She also died of a weird sickness, which incest, messes with genetics and stuff. So
Right.
Um,
That was one I wasn't gonna go with until I seen somebody else saying it. Because in a weird sickness back then, they could have been a pregnancy and her body could have rejected it because it was the same bloodline. And that just, I don't know. It's just gross to even think about, honestly. Can't help it. It's gross to actually have to think about it.
Right. Any time in the future, people make fun of West Virginians for marrying their cousins or whatever. Just remember the story, right? The old English used to do this type of stuff all the time, right? Preserve the bloodlines.
that was one more thing that I'd listened. He mentioned that the sickness of the mind that the character was feeling was due to syphilis. Because after a while, gone untreated, syphilis can mess with the mind.
Right. So, of the two analyses that have been posited, which do you guys find more feasible? The incest analysis or the queer analysis?
Honestly, I think I like just the way it reads. I like the incest better. But overall, I thought it was just so much more different than what everybody else was saying, because everybody was falling around the same line. That one really stuck out to me. But I'm a face value kind of guy. 'Cause I like being able to read something, know what they're talking about without having to go too far into detail, drawing my own conclusions. I like the face value.
Right. Haley, you were going to unmute yourself a second ago. Did you have a thought here?
I was just gonna say I agree with. Personally, I see it more as the incest side of things, because, like you had said, back in those days, it wasn't thought of as bad as it is now. It was more common because it wanted to stay in the bloodline. I see that more or less towards the bloodline than I do the queerness or gayness.
Tiffany?
Well, at the beginning of the conversation, that's where I led with the incest. But after Jacob mentioned the queerness, and then you explained how the authors would, write about basically making everything in the story offset to depict something of a of the character. I can see that, and even having homosexual friends myself, I have some of them are real feminine, and that could be his relationship with his sister. He may not be like a guy's guy. He may be more on the feminine side, is why the house was falling apart and why they had such a bond, why he had such a love for her. And then with the sickness, he could have contracted something. Um, you know, that was really interesting. but I didn't think of it that way until Jacob said that.
Right? Yeah, it's I think there's textual evidence for both theories here as far as that goes. If we were going to go along the lines of the queer analysis, just the fact that he does spend so much time in the story building the atmosphere, talking about the settings, right? That alone, I think, warrants this analysis that we're on. Yeah, I mean, later in the class when we read The Haunting of Hill House, one of the novels we'll read, look out for this kind of thing again, right? Because I don't know if you guys have seen the Netflix show, right? But there is some stuff going on in that book, right, under the surface too. So we'll re-explore this idea later again with that novel. But yeah, just the way that he described the atmosphere in the story, so interesting. I'm trying to find you a good passage here. Let's see.
Yeah, that was one of those ones that was so long I just couldn't print it off.
Right. Yeah, I'm reading out of my book here instead of the PDF. Well, even the opening paragraph of the story, we could go to that. The opening paragraph of the story, it says, during the whole of the dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singularly dreary tract of country, and at length found myself at the shades of the evening grew on within view of the melancholy house of Usher. I know not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I say insufferable, for the feeling was unrelieved by any of that half pleasurable, because poetic sentiment with which the mind usually receives even the sternest natural images of the desolate or terrible. I looked upon the features of the domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon a few rank sedges, and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of soul of which I cannot compare to no earthly sensation more properly into the after dream of the reveler upon opium, the bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off the veil. There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart, an unredeemed dreariness of thought which no goading of the imagination could torture into aught of the sublime. What was it, I paused to think, what was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation in the house of Usher? It was a mystery all insoluble, nor could I grasp with the shadowy fancies that crowded upon me as I pondered. I was forced to fall back upon the unsatisfactory conclusion that while beyond doubt there are combinations of very simple natural objects which have the power of thus affecting us, still the analysis of this power lies among considerations beyond their depth. It is possible, I reflected, that a mere different arrangement of the particulars of the scene, of the details of the picture, would be sufficient to modify or perhaps to annihilate its capacity for sorrowful impression. And acting upon this idea, I reined my horse to the precipitous brink of a black and lurid tarn that lay in unruffled luster by the dwelling, and gazed down, but with a shudder even more thrilling than before, upon the remodeled and inverted images of the gray sedge and the ghastly tree stems and the vacant and eye-like windows. Right, so you got there's some textual proof of how this kind of thing works. Right, the windows are so weird. Right, they're eye-like. He says something that he can't quite describe is uncanny about the scene. Right, maybe he said maybe if a bush was over here instead of over here. Right, maybe it would seem more normal than it is. Right, so something that's quite a little bit off. You can't, something peculiar. You can't quite explain it, right? That's how this type of symbolism works. Right?
You know, I've never noticed it. That just puts so many things into perspective. I didn't know that there was a terminology for it. Like I said, I never,
Right.
until my dad came out of the closet, I never would have given it a second thought. I've been trying to be a little more acceptable and think a little differently the last few years. And glad we had this talk.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this type of study I do find interesting, right? I'm a straight person myself, right? But I've always found this type of analysis interesting. I mean, just think about, I mean, that type of thing, especially then, was unacceptable, right? You couldn't just straight out write a story about gay characters, right? You had to shroud it in some type of code and mystery, right? So just like I said, the way that I just read that, right? Horror stories where a lot of that type of thing comes out. Horror stories is kind of, allow writers a little freedom to pursue those subjects, right? Again, watch out for it later in the class when they read The Haunting of Hill House, right? Because there's a lot of that going on under the surface in that story. That story was written in the 1950s, so that's 1950s, right? Was definitely a time period where you couldn't spell stuff like that out, right? That was Leave It to Beaver type of America, right? So very similar stories of Ligeia and House of Usher in many ways. It so dramatically crumbles at the end, right? It's so dramatic. I love it. Well, we got to leave some time for William Wilson here too. Even if you didn't get through the story, even if you didn't get through the story entirely, the idea here is something we can discuss, right?
Well,
and that's the idea of the doppelganger, right? Did any of you guys see the movie that came out a couple of years ago called Us? You know what I'm talking about, Jacob? Us.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Oh yeah. I saw that one.
Who said they've seen it?
I've also seen it. It's really, really good.
Taylor, you've seen it, right? That film plays with this idea too, right? The idea that maybe in some other realm or something, right? We have an identical person to us, right? A person that's exactly us. It's almost like a shadow self, right? You have your own clone almost somewhere, right, in the universe. And that movie Us played with that. These characters met their doppelgangers. The clone is called a doppelganger. They meet their doppelgangers who are much more sinister and nasty, right, than they are as civilized people. Right. So this is what's going on with William Wilson, right? William Wilson meets someone who is born on the same day as him, who wears the same clothes as him, who looks like him. Right, the look, he says he doesn't notice the looks until much later, which is kind of weird, right? But he's stalked by his shadow self, right? An evil William Wilson, right? That kind of course, William Wilson, the character here, is not so great either, right? He's all about living the party life, gambling and sleeping around and all this stuff, right? Yeah, he's interested in the party life, but his shadow self follows him around, right? So it's a bit of an unsettling idea, right? The fact that someone is just like you and is your pretty much carbon copy.
I'm gonna have to read both.
Yeah. Yeah, the psychologically speaking, right, doppelgangers are literal, right? But psychologically speaking, there's lots of ways you could probably talk about doppelgangers, right? Maybe it's your, whenever, if we want to go into like Freudian psychology, right? Maybe it's your repressed self, right? It's the repression that you do on a daily basis of stuff that you know is wrong, right? It's so. This is a day I wish Colton was here. Right? Colton would love this, but it's your repressed self that comes out. That comes out. So maybe the doppelganger isn't even real, right? Maybe it's metaphorical. Go ahead, Jake.
Usually when I think doppelganger, I think like multiverse, like there's endless possibilities, Murphy's Law, whatever can happen does happen, breaks off and separates time. I always like to really lean towards that. And it sounds like with this, instead of, choices really breaking apart the timeline, it's the choices you don't, it's like we were talking with what was the story last week, the black cat, where you have these urges and you can do this, but something stops you. And like I said, I didn't read it, I didn't do any analysis on it, I just didn't get to it. But just trying to stay with what you're doing, I think I got an opinion on it already.
Of course, if you've seen that movie Us, right, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You guys tell me about that movie. What do you remember about that movie?
I've got a cold train going by.
Might be my dad driving by. He's an engineer. Taylor, you said you'd seen the movie before. What do you remember about it?
I remember like the main beginning, because like the main beginning pretty much ties in with the end. So that's the part I remember, because how like she goes to that carnival as a kid or whatever, and like how she comes out like, I guess you could say, as her clone instead of her real self. So it kind of makes you wonder which one's the actual clone, which one's herself. Because honestly, I have no idea at the end, because she finds her way back there, and then I don't really know, because like in the beginning it talks about like how she found her clone or whatever, how she got in there. But at the end of it, it also has her go back to that same spot or whatever. So does it mean like if it was her actual self, did she like grow up to be like her clone? Like did she grow up to be that person, or was she trained to be like that, or was it her real self, or was it her clone? And then I remember like as a kid she hated going back there too, but then like she got older, she went there with her own family. Like if you were kind of scared to go there, why would you go back there with your own family knowing it was scary and like you didn't want to be there? So I remember that. And then I kind of remember that whole movie, to be honest, but like I remember like it wasn't just her family that was cloned either. It was like the whole like town and everything. It wasn't just her family, which is kind of creepy. And like they came together and like held hands for some reason. I don't get that part, but they were always holding hands. It was kind of weird. And like another thing was like the clones also had the same talents as her family did. Like her daughter, she ran track or whatever, she was a runner, and like the clone ran and everything, which is kind of creepy, but it's not hard to forget at all.
Yeah. It's one of those movies that sticks with you after. And in that movie,
like it makes you.
Go ahead, Taylor.
I feel like it makes you wonder if you have a clone or not. Like if somebody outside of like your state or your town or whatever is like you, like it makes you wonder, like, do I have a clone somewhere in the world, or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, in that movie, they switch out right at an early age. The real kid gets switched with the doppelganger, right? And then the real kid ends up living in the doppelganger world. I do remember that about it. So the real kid, the kid that goes back to the doppelganger world remembers the real world, right? So that's why she comes out of hiding and springs out, because it's actually the real kid and not the doppelganger. Right?
I think
I think in
one of
like
the big. I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead.
no, you're good. Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me with the train in the background?
Yeah.
All right. I think one of the big things with the Us movie, going back to Ligeia again, was, the awareness. In the other world, all the doppelgangers, they had their eyes, but it was almost like they were blind. And it wasn't that they were blind, but that they lacked awareness of their being. They lacked awareness of their surroundings. And I think that was one of the big things. Is the real version of the girl that went into the other world, she had her awareness, and she was able to make the others find their awareness, and they came out from the other world to hold hands to say, here we are. You forgot about us, but here we are, and we're standing as a single unit. There was a lot going on in that movie, and another one of those things that you could interpret 1,000 different ways.
It's one of Jordan Peele's finest works. Like, of course, you guys know Jordan Peele's famous for being a comedian, but now he's a famous horror director too.
It's also like how he says like they lack something. I noticed this in like whenever they just get there and like the people come to their house or whatever, they cannot talk. Like they did not know how to communicate whatsoever. Like the only one that talked was like the girl, but she talked like really slow and like her words didn't come
Broken.
together like how they should, like normal people talk. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same in this story, William Wilson, right? Yeah, he grows up with this person who's his rival, right, in school. It's like childhood frenemies, you could probably say, right? Yeah, but he starts to discover something's amiss, right? He sneaks into this other William Wilson's room and finds out that this other William Wilson has the same clothes and all this stuff. And then as life goes on, this other William Wilson mysteriously follows him around. And so even like he goes country to country, he goes to Germany and Russia and Italy, right? No matter where he goes, this other William Wilson's following him around. Like when he's trying to do his card tricks, right, where he's gambling, he's cheating at cards, and like the other William Wilson just kind of busts the door open. It's like, look at this guy, he's a cheater, right? So, and the story is so great too, because when it ends, he stabs the other William Wilson, and then the other William Wilson says, well, you killed yourself, right? And that's kind of how the story ends. And, it's pretty creepy. It's a creepy concept.
I feel like it was his alter ego and like a murder suicide.
Right. So you said maybe a split personality type thing, Kristen? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, definitely. That was my take from the beginning.
Right. Because to support that, we don't really get mention of other characters interacting with the other William Wilson. I don't know if you guys noticed that while you were reading, but no other character really interacts with him. So if it was a split personality type thing, that the lack of communication between the other William Wilson and any other character would support that. The only person who sees him is the narrator, which is interesting.
Another unreliable narrator.
Right. Yeah, he talks about being a heavy alcoholic in the story, right? For once, it's not just opium and alcohol aren't mixed, right? It's just alcohol in this story, right? Too much wine, right? Yeah, but Yeah, perhaps another unreliable narrator, right? Maybe he's got some type of split personality or something. I don't know. Now that we've explained all this, what do you guys think of this idea? You find it creepy? You find it uncanny, weird, peculiar in any way? Right? What do you guys make of it?
I've always wondered if I had another person somewhere in the world that looked like me.
Acted like you, right?
Yeah, always.
I kind of feel like you find somebody that acts like you, but is that person really you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I have a lot of friends that are like my personality. We laugh at the same things, like the same things, stuff like that. But is that my clone, but just a different name, different look? You know what I mean? So it makes me wonder. But it is kind of creepy.
Honestly, I don't think I'd want to know because I don't think the world could handle two of me. Honestly, I think it's creepy. Shut up. My mom just said, "Ain't that the truth?" Because growing up, it was hard. It was hard on everybody, and I don't think the world could handle two of me. I have not yet met somebody that likes the same things as me, that has the same personality as me. I don't know if it's part of my bipolar or what, but I probably don't want to know because it is creepy to think that there'd be two of you if you're not already a twin.
Well, just think about all the people in the world that do have lookalikes, right? You see that kind of thing all the time, right? Somebody looks just like someone, right? It's pretty common.
I kind
More
of feel like
common.
though, like having a twin, like I don't have a twin or anything like that, but like I have a friend that has a twin, but they like opposite. Like they're not even the same person, even though they look alike, they're just opposite. So like I don't get that, but
Yeah, I had two students a couple of years ago who were twins, and it was the exact opposite. They looked alike, they dressed alike. Yeah, they did the same. They were doing the same major, right? It took me a while to get to know their names, right? Just because they were so similar to each other, I couldn't even figure out which one was which. Just because they felt like the same person. Eventually, as I learned the difference and got to know each of them individually, but they were so similar. It spooked me a little. I'm not going to lie.
I definitely go ahead.
Sorry. My kids, they're 14 months apart. They don't look a lot. They don't act a lot. But the thing is, my daughter looks like me. My son looks like my brother. My daughter acts just like me. My son acts just like my brother. So it's creepy because my son is almost identical to when my brother was a kid. They act identical and everything. And then my daughter looks like me and she acts like me. And I wonder if they're like going to grow up and, going to be like us or something. It's kind of scary. So I think they're going to be like, yeah. After thinking about that and then thinking about, or hearing about William Wilson and then thinking about that just now, I'm wondering if it would be a possibility, even at different ages.
Haley, you want to say something? Or not Haley, Taylor. Taylor was going to say something.
I definitely think it's the alter ego theory, like 100%. The fact that no one else talks about him except the narrator or like interacts with him, I definitely think it's alter ego.
Right. So Taylor and Kristen are one on this theory of maybe a smaller ego or split personality. Yeah, I can't even explain why I find it creepy. I just do, right? The thought, I'm with you, Irene. The thought of another Jeff Yeager in the world is too much to handle. I don't think the world can handle two of me either. I mean, two literature professors who both like horror stories. So I don't think the world can handle two of me. Right, maybe the other one's teaching in Wisconsin or Iowa somewhere. I don't know. Yeah, if you guys like this story and you haven't seen that film Us, you gotta go check it out. It's a good time. I don't think anything else we're reading in this class has doppelgangers. I don't think so. So this is the only time we're going to encounter this idea.
Well, I'm not so sure. Back in the House of Usher, I did listen to an analysis that they were saying the brother and sister were doppelgangers.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear this analysis too.
Like I said, my computer keeps all the history. I'll have to get the URLs and I'll post them.
Right, a case of a brother and even a brother and sister are looking exactly alike. Right, that's kind of strange too when you see that. So yeah, interesting discussions today, guys. Again, these three stories are so different from each other, but they all have very fun ideas to play around with. So how do you guys feel about Poe at the end of our exploration of it, right? You guys feel like you appreciate him more? Are you asking them more questions, scratching your head more, even more now? I know, Irene, you said last week you were a big Poe fan, right? Do you feel like you understand him more?
Yeah. I didn't think he was that crazy before until after I got into him. Like, I don't know, there's like some of his short stories that's still to this day that's relevant and can still be broken down and thought about. I didn't think that it would leave me with so many more questions after each story or poem, but it seems like everyone that we've read so far is open at the end. It's for your own interpretations. It's like he's only given us a piece of his mind instead of telling us everything. And that's with all the stories, all the poems. And it's like you'll never fully know Poe, and that's just the way he wanted it.
I don't know. It's definitely one of those classes where I wish I had more time to devote to it. Other classes keep me pretty busy. I enjoy this one.
All right. Yeah, I know, Jacob, especially last week, you were really keyed in on those stories, especially Imple the Perverse, I remember from last week. Taylor, I thought you were going to say something a second ago. You have a thought?
I think that even if you don't enjoy like Poe's type of writing, I think you should respect because he is such a good writer. Like even his stories that I don't necessarily like enjoy, like the Williams Wilson one. I didn't necessarily enjoy it myself. I still thought the writing was just so good. And I love his poems. His poems are my favorite.
Tiffany, how do you feel about Poe after this long journey?
I'm with Irene. I feel like I'm still left with a lot of questions at the end of his stories and his poems. And I read Poe back in 7th grade. And, as a 11, 12-year-old, you don't really get in depth into, the mindset of the author. But now revisiting it, I mean, he had some mental issues going on. And if he didn't have any mental issues going on, then, it makes you wonder what was really going on in his head if there wasn't some kind of mental health issues or whatever. So, yeah, I'm still left with a lot of questions.
Other final thoughts here from Taylor Horton or Kristen, Haley Woodle. Final thoughts from you guys.
Coming from all the Poe stuff in high school, because I did a lot. Like, I was always in like English honors or like the upper classes of English, and we did a lot of Poe. But when I read them and stuff back in high school, I didn't really think twice about it. I just read it, got it done. But now with this open discussions that we've had, like, it's put me in a bigger mindset about Poe and left me like more read a story smell now, just to think about all the possibilities and different ways they could be brought.
In high school, we were more of a consumer of the story, just enjoying the story for the story's sake, right? But now we're bringing all this analysis stuff into it, right? Other thoughts on the last two of you here, Taylor Horton and Kristen?
I just think that he definitely has some mental health issues going on, and he's just all over the place, honestly. It's hard for me to get like into his stories and stuff, but I just feel like he has so many mental health issues, then mixed with like alcohol and drugs it explains a lot. So
Unreliable author giving unreliable narrators, right? That's what we've been studying here. Yeah, so I'm glad you guys found this stuff interesting and rewarding in some ways. Some of the stuff we've talked about, like House of Usher, for instance, right? If you were talking about House of Usher in a high school classroom, there's no way you would dive into talking about stuff like incest or gay themes in it, right? There's you guys know how high school English is. There's no way you would dive into that type of stuff in a high school classroom. So, which is limiting in a way, right? Those kids in high school classrooms are pretty much adults, right? They should be exposed to adult ideas, I think. But that's why
I can't speak for everybody else, but when I was in high school, I didn't know my ass from a hole in the ground. I hadn't been around. 18 years. It's nothing. And to you, it's your entire life. At that point in time, it's your entire life. But you have no concept of time. You haven't had enough experiences to really understand what's going on. And because of that, you're just unable to grasp these bigger ideas, these bigger concepts. And I think that's the biggest drawback from being a high school student, and why even though college is so expensive, why it's still being pushed upon today's youth is because you need that extra chance to grow. For me, I went the other way with it. I joined the military, and that's kind of how I grew up. But you need that time to kind of settle in and adapt to first being broke and building yourself up from nothing. That's a huge thing. Get out of your mom's house and just try to make it. That's a big slap to the face, just by itself. And then, on top of that, having a full schedule. Having your day planned from the time you wake up, time you go to bed. It's a huge thing. And that's not something that you really get into in high school. At the end of the school day, what happens on Friday? you got anything to do on Saturday? Is there anything coming Monday besides school? Uh, No concept of time.
I think also in high school, they just didn't care. They're like, okay, you're gonna read Poe and then or this story or this poem in Poe, and then you're gonna say what you think. Back then in high school, we didn't know anything but what we were told, what they knew to tell us. And most of the time our English teachers didn't know anything except what was in the textbook. So whatever, you could have just BS'd it and got away with it. But now that you're an adult, you know to look for other things. And I think that's what makes it easier and more intriguing, because now you're like, okay, well, we don't have to talk about stanzas. We don't have to talk about paragraphs. Now we look at the author, we look at the narrator, we look at the scenes, we look at the emotions. We know everything to look for now. And that's why Poe is better now than I thought it was in high school, because we were forced to do it. And like my nieces said, they had to do it for 6 months. Here in college, we do it for like a couple weeks, and we're able to look at it better. We're not forced to constantly every single day. Every day it's the same thing. Okay, you're going to go home, we're going to read this page to this page, and then when you come to school tomorrow, we're going to write about it. It's not jammed down our throats. It's just, to me, it's easier. And I think that's why I got more out of it than I did then. And that's why I was able to analyze him a lot better.
So, when I was in high school, I had some great teachers. That's part of why I am who I am today, probably. Some folks aren't so lucky in those years.
Yeah, I think I could agree with that. I had some really great teachers. Though I gotta say, Dr. Yeager, you're one of the only people I've ever met with a doctorate besides a medical degree. And I find you really insightful.
I appreciate that, Jacob. I think you're insightful too. You bring a lot of good stuff to the class. Everybody has different life experiences that they bring into the class, right? That's what makes the class so rich, I think. So very good. So give you guys a preview for next week, what to look out for. Looking at our syllabus. So it looks like next week we're going to read the 2 other famous Gothic writers of pre-Civil War America. Monday, you're going to read a story from a guy named William Gilmore Simms. It's called The Grayling or Murder Will Out. So this is a famous ghost story, right, of pre-Civil War America. So you're going to actually get some ghosts next week. So a different type of horror than a madman, this type of like madmen horror that we've gotten. That's your Monday post. To give you guys a little bit of context about that real quick, Simms is a writer that's not read much now. Like, he's not in the literature textbooks. He was a best-selling author of his time. Like, this guy was like a John Grisham in the time with like how many books he sold. He sold way more books than Poe ever did. Right? But he's not well read today because he happened to live in South Carolina before the war and was very pro-slavery. Right? So even his works have some like pro-slavery views in them. So he's not read much now because literature is a very political. You guys know the sort of stigmas, right? In the humanities, right? Usually professors are more left-leaning, right? Well, the profession of literature definitely is like that, right? So Simms isn't read much these days, and maybe for good reason, right? But I'm bringing him in here just because this is a really interesting ghost story. I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say about it next Monday. We'll probably talk about it in this class next Monday or next Wednesday too. And the other two.
Now,
go ahead, Jake.
What's the date? Like, pre-Civil War, what, like 1830 something?
Sims was writing in the 1840s, 1850s.
Okay.
He was very pro-slavery. Great writer, in my opinion. I mean, so you guys are reading the story pretty much. Probably not many other people in this whole country are actually reading, right? It's a story that's kind of in the dusty archives, right? There's not too much material about it. So like, even if you guys get on YouTube, you won't find too much about this story. So I have a summer class I did where I talked about it some. So you guys actually might find me on YouTube if you Google this story. But I'll actually provide you that video on our Blackboard. I'll provide that video. But so yeah, he's for next Monday. And next Wednesday, we're reading some Hawthorne. So Hawthorne was the other sort of big literary giant of pre-Civil War America, just like Poe. You guys might know him from a book called The Scarlet Letter, right? Nathaniel Hawthorne is who wrote The Scarlet Letter. You know, the famous story of Hester cheating on her husband and then having to wear the letter as a symbol of shame, right? But the stories we're going to read from him are called The Birthmark, Rappaccini's Daughter, and The Minister's Black Veil. And two of those stories have to do with the practice of medicine in pre-Civil War America. So if some of you guys in here, any of you guys in this Zoom today, like medical people, like going into nursing or something like that? No one, is anyone in here doing that?
I'm going into sonography.
Right.
So I
Yes.
plan on that later on.
Right. So if you guys are especially interested in medicine, you guys will find Hawthorne interesting. We'll unpack why he was so interested in medicine next week. This subject is actually what I did my doctorate thesis on, is all these different writers and how they handled medical issues of their time. I'll definitely look forward to talking about that with you. And The Minister's Black Veil is it's a story of the colonial times, right? That's when it's colonial New England during the witch trials, that type of period, right? So that's when that story takes place. You guys will find Hawthorne's much different, especially with narrators and things like that. He's a different cup of tea than Poe. There's two types of people in the world: Poe people and Hawthorne people, right? So I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say about them. So that's your preview for next week. Any final thoughts before we conclude? All right, guys. Well, good class. We'll see you again next week. You guys have a good evening, good weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.